You've probably heard the question rattling around in the back of your head. I have some money saved, but how do I actually turn it into income without running out? Maybe you sold a house. Maybe you've got a 401k that's decent but not great, and someone told you to just put it all in a target date fund and take 4% a year. Here's what they didn't tell you. Vanguard's own research, published in June 2026, now says that for someone relying on a portfolio without significant pension income, a 3.5% to 4% withdrawal rate is more realistic than the famous 4% rule, and that shaving just half a percentage point off your withdrawal rate can add 5 full years of portfolio life. 5 years. That's not a rounding error. If you started late, and according to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median household age 55 to 64 has just $185,000 saved, the sequence in which you pull money out of your accounts may matter more than the total amount sitting in them right now. But the question isn't just how much you have, it's which accounts you tap, in what order, and when. That's what we're going to work through today. Let me start by being honest about that $185,000 number, because I think it matters. When you see news articles saying the average household near retirement has over $537,000 saved, that average is being pulled upward by a small group of very wealthy households. The Federal Reserve's own data shows only 9.2% of 55 to 64-year-olds have more than $1 million. The middle of the distribution, the place where most people actually live, is $185,000, and about 43% of households in that age range have no retirement account balance at all. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because the 3-bucket strategy was largely designed for people with $500,000 or more, and if you're starting the distribution phase with less than that, you need to adapt it, not abandon it. The core idea is simple. You divide your assets into 3 buckets based on when you'll need the money. Bucket 1 is your near-term cash reserve, money you'll spend in roughly the next 1 to 2 years sitting in a high-yield savings account or a money market fund. No market risk. This is what pays your electric bill if the S&P 500 drops 30% next spring and you refuse to sell equities at the bottom. Bucket 2 is your medium-term buffer. Think 2 to 10 years of projected spending held in shorter duration bonds, bond funds, or certificates of deposit. It's not exciting. It's not supposed to be. Its job is to replenish Bucket 1 as you drain it without requiring you to sell stocks during a bad market. Bucket 3 is everything else. Your growth engine, primarily equities. And this is the bucket most late starters are tempted to shrink too aggressively. That's a mistake I'll come back to. The reason sequence of withdrawals matters so much is something called sequence of returns risk. If you retire and the market falls hard in years 1 through 3, the way it did from 2000 to 2002 or during 2008, and you're forced to sell stocks to cover living expenses at depressed prices, you permanently impair your portfolio in a way that a later recovery can't fully fix. The bucket structure exists to give your equities time to recover without forcing you to liquidate at the worst moment. When markets are down, you live off Bucket 1 and refill from Bucket 2. You don't touch Bucket 3. Now, here's where late starters have to think differently than someone who's been methodically saving since 35. If you're 58 or 60 right now, your accumulation window is compressed. You may have an uneven mix of account types, a big traditional 401k, maybe a small Roth, maybe taxable brokerage savings from a house sale, and you're facing a set of Secure 2.0 rules that actually give you some meaningful levers if you use them in the next few years. The 2026 401k contribution limit is $24,500. If you're 50 or older, you can add the $8,000 catch-up for a total of $32,500. And if you happen to be between ages 60 and 63 right now, Secure 2.0 created what the IRS calls a super catch-up, an additional $11,250 instead of the standard $8,000, bringing your total potential 401k contribution to $35,750 for 2026. That window closes the day you turn 64, with no makeup provision. I'd treat it like a closing door, because that's exactly what it is. Let me tell you where I think advisors get this backwards most of the time, and I say this having watched it play out with real people over a lot of years. The standard advice is, be conservative as you approach retirement, shift to bonds, don't take risk. And there's a version of that which is right, but the version most people actually execute, dumping everything into bonds and cash when they retire, creates a different kind of catastrophe in slow motion. Vanguard's own default glide path doesn't reach 30% stocks and 70% bonds until age 72. Before that, even in retirement, they're recommending a meaningful equity allocation. For a late starter with $185,000 and a 25 to 30-year retirement ahead, an all-bond or all-cash portfolio almost guarantees you outlive your money. Inflation alone, even at modest rates, erodes purchasing power over 3 decades in a way that bonds can't fully offset. My take is that bucket 3, the equity bucket, needs to stay at least 40% to 50% of your total portfolio through your early retirement years, even if that feels uncomfortable. The discomfort is the point. You're not taking that risk carelessly. You're taking it because the math of a 30-year drawdown requires it. The cash and bond buckets are your emotional insulation. They let you hold the equity bucket long enough for it to do its job. One thing that often gets overlooked, what counts as guaranteed income, changes the calculus significantly. Social Security, a pension, or an annuity that covers your basic living expenses means bucket 1 can be smaller, and bucket 3 can stay invested longer. The SSA reported that the average retired worker benefit rises to $2,071 per month in 2026 after the 2.8% COLA adjustment. For a married couple, you might have $3,000 to $4,000 a month in combined Social Security. That changes your withdrawal math fundamentally. Your portfolio doesn't have to do as much heavy lifting if the basics are covered by guaranteed income. Your filing status and your claiming age both matter enormously here, which is something worth modeling carefully before you touch bucket 1. Now, the piece of the puzzle that most people planning on their own completely miss: the Roth conversion window. This is the period between when you retire and when your required minimum distributions kick in. And Vanguard's June 2026 research found that more than 80% of clients in their tax-efficient retirement strategy benefit from doing Roth conversions during exactly this window. Here's why. When you stop working, your ordinary income drops, sometimes dramatically. If you're living off bucket 1 and bucket 2, your taxable income in those years might be low enough that you can convert a chunk of your traditional 401k or IRA to Roth at a 12% or 22% marginal rate. Later, when RMDs force you to take distributions whether you need the money or not, those withdrawals land on top of your other income. They can push you into a higher bracket. They can trigger the income-related Medicare surcharges known as IRMAA, and if you're widowed, they hit on single-filer tax brackets, which are far less forgiving than married filing jointly. Under Secure 2.0, RMDs now begin at age 73 for people born between 1951 and 1959. If you were born in 1960 or later, your RMD start date is age 75, which actually gives you a longer conversion window. The IRS Uniform Lifetime Table sets the distribution period at 73 at 26.5 years, which means a $100,000 IRA balance produces a first-year RMD of roughly $3,774. Doesn't sound huge. But if you have $400,000 in a traditional IRA by then, your forced withdrawal is over $15,000, on top of Social Security, on top of any other income. That's where people get surprised. And the penalty for missing an RMD is still 25% of the amount you should have taken, though Secure 2.0 did reduce it to 10% if you correct it within 2 years. I wouldn't test either number. One more tool that doesn't get enough attention for people in this situation: the qualified charitable distribution. If you're 70 and a half or older and you give to charity anyway, a QCD lets you transfer up to $111,000 directly from your IRA to a qualifying charity in 2026, up from $108,000 in 2025. That transfer counts toward your RMD, but is completely excluded from your adjusted gross income. No IRMAA, no bump in Social Security taxation. It's one of the cleaner tools in the tax code for people who have too much in traditional IRAs and are charitably inclined. There's another number hanging over all of this that I want to be direct about. The 2026 Social Security Trustees Report projects that the combined trust funds will be exhausted by 2034. At that point, without congressional action, only 83% of scheduled benefits would be payable. If you're 55 today, you're likely retiring right around that window. I'm not saying Social Security disappears. Congress has always found some mechanism to prop it up, and the most likely outcome is some combination of tax increases and benefit adjustments, not a full cutoff. But my position is this: If you're planning your buckets and your withdrawal sequence, build a scenario where Social Security pays 83 cents on the dollar and see if your plan still holds. If it doesn't, that's useful information right now, while you still have time to adjust bucket sizes or delay claiming. Speaking of claiming, I've said it before on this channel and I'll say it again. The single most expensive Social Security mistake I see late starters make is claiming at 62 out of anxiety. The fear that the system might not be there drives people to grab the money early, but claiming at 62 versus 70 can reduce your monthly benefit by 30% or more for the rest of your life. And crucially, the earnings test in 2026 means if you're under your full retirement age and still working, the SSA withholds $1 in benefits for every $2 you earn above $24,480. Claiming early while you're still earning isn't just suboptimal. It can actually result in checks getting withheld entirely. The math on delay is almost always better than the fear driving early claims. I also want to flag one thing about Medicare that tends to blindside people the year they retire. The standard Medicare Part B premium is estimated at somewhere between $202.90 and $206.50 per month in 2026, up from $185 in 2025. That's a roughly 10% jump. And it comes directly out of your Social Security check, which partially offsets the 2.8% COLA you just got. The reason this matters for your bucket strategy, your real after Medicare Social Security income, is lower than the headline number. Factor that into what your guaranteed income floor actually looks like before you size bucket 1. There's also a new rule taking effect January 1st, 2026, that directly affects how you build your buckets during the accumulation phase. And it affects you if you're 50 or older and earned more than $145,000 in FICA wages last year. Starting this year, any catch-up contributions you make to a 401k, 403b, or governmental 457b must go in as Roth, after-tax contributions, not pre-tax. The IRS finalized these regulations in September 2025. The practical impact: if your employer plan doesn't offer a Roth option, you can't make catch-up contributions at all this year. That's not a hypothetical. Some smaller plans haven't added Roth yet, and if yours hasn't, the right move is to contact your HR department immediately and ask. There's no workaround. If your income is below $145,000, this rule doesn't touch you. But if you're above that threshold, I'd actually argue the Roth catch-up requirement is a long-term benefit in disguise. Those dollars grow tax-free, they're not subject to RMDs during your lifetime, and they give Bucket 3 more flexibility in retirement. The loss of the pre-tax deduction stings now, but the tax-free withdrawal later, especially during the Roth conversion window we talked about, is real money. I cover catch-up retirement strategy for late starters, and the honest truth I keep coming back to is this: the people who feel most behind aren't behind because of what's in their accounts. They're behind because nobody ever showed them how the accounts talk to each other. The bucket strategy isn't about having a perfect portfolio. It's about having a structure that keeps you from making panic decisions in a bad market and a tax plan that doesn't blow up your Medicare premiums. Before I get to what's next, I'm not a licensed financial advisor. This is general education, not personalized advice. Consult a fiduciary before acting. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd encourage you to. This channel is built specifically for people who started saving later than they'd planned and want real numbers, not reassuring platitudes. Drop a comment below with any retirement income question you'd like me to dig into next, whether that's annuities, withdrawal sequencing for a specific account mix, or something else entirely, and I'll work it into an upcoming video. Next week, I'm going deep on something that affects every single Social Security number you've ever looked at, but that almost nobody actually understands. The bend point formula, the specific mechanics the SSA uses to calculate what your benefit actually will be. That one's going to reframe how you think about your whole earnings history. See you then. This video may contain affiliate links. I only recommend tools I use personally.